This is slide 8 in our 70s unit, President Carter's Foreign Affairs. Now, if you'll recall, we just in our last slide talked a little bit about President Carter, good, honest, upstanding Christian man, and those same ideals, especially concern for human rights, would drive his foreign policy. Above all else, he was concerned about people and their well-being. Okay? That will personally lead to his greatest success in foreign policy, what's known as the Camp David Accords. Now, first of all, we need to understand what Camp David is. Camp David is the presidential retreat. It's in Maryland, I believe, outside of Washington, D.C., and it's the world's most high-tech summer camp. You could fight a war from there if you had to. It's incredibly secure. Secret Service runs it. But it's in the middle of the woods. It has cabins, and it's a beautiful place. When the president wants to get out of D.C. and away from everything in Washington, D.C., he goes to Camp David. The press is not allowed at Camp David, so he wants to get away from them. That's where he goes. It's a great just retreat, place to get away from everything. Carter will negotiate one of the most historic peace treaties in history. It's known as the Camp David Accords. An accord is simply an agreement. So this is the Camp David Agreements. It is negotiated at Camp David between the Israeli Prime Minister, okay, a man named Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin. It looks like begin, but it's pronounced Begin. This is the guy on the right in the picture. That's what the R stands for. There's Begin right there. There's Carter in the middle. Now this picture is taken when they're all dressed up at the White House, the official signing and all that. But again, the negotiations took place at Camp David. But anyway, the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and the Egyptian President, a man named Anwar Sadat. It's the man on the left here. That's the L. Now, this is historic because, again, Israel is Jewish. Egypt is a Muslim Arab country. Arabs don't like Jews. Jews don't like Arabs. And Egypt is one of the largest, most powerful of the Arab countries. So for Egypt to be willing to sit down and negotiate a peace treaty with Israel is a very big deal. Right? And this is the highlight of Carter's foreign policy. Here's foreign affairs. Okay? Another little small aside here involves the Panama Canal. Okay? Carter would negotiate a deal to turn over control of the Panama Canal to Panama as of December 31st, 1999, so the end of the 20th century. So on January 1, 2000, Panama took control of the Panama Canal. It was just beginning to get too expensive for the U.S. to maintain. It was going to need to be enlarged, which it did, and did again, twice more. And it was costing us too much money. It was costing us more than we were making on it. So Panama says, we'll take it over. We'd like it. We have people we can put to work there. We'll take the income. It's in our country, all that. Now, Carter does negotiate a pretty sweet deal. The United States still gets very preferential rates when using the canal. We pay less than everybody else does to use it, but we don't have to maintain it. So it's a pretty good deal Carter works out. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is a big one here. And this will involve Iran. Okay? We need to go back a little bit here and kind of set the stage for what happens. Okay? In the 1950s, the United States helped put into power in Iran a man named Shah Pahlavi. Okay? Shah Pahlavi. Actually, his name is Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He is known as the Shah. Okay? Now, this is his picture down here in the bottom. He had been trained, educated in the West, He liked the West. He liked Western Europe. He liked the United States. We did a lot of business with him, and we made a lot of money in Iran. Some people would say too much money in Iran. And we liked the Shah, and we put him into power. Now, the Shah is a political title. It's like saying president or king or prime minister, something like that. It's just a political title. So Shah Pahlavi is like saying President Carter. Okay? But we put the Shah in power, and we liked him being in power, and we made a lot of money off of him. But by the time the late 1970s come along, the Iranian people have had about enough of Pahlavi and the United States. They think the United States is getting the better end of the deal here. We're making more money than they are. Okay? So the people decide they've had enough, and they turn to a religious leader named, whoops, get my right thing back there, the Ayatollah Khomeini. Okay? Khomeini. Ayatollah, and this is his picture down here in the bottom. Ayatollah, if Shah is a political title, Ayatollah is a religious title. The Ayatollah Khomeini is a religious Muslim leader. Okay? Saying Ayatollah is like saying priest or pastor or rabbi, something like that. Okay? The Ayatollah Khomeini would lead an overthrow of the Iranian government. Now, Iran is a huge oil-producing country. We get a lot of oil from Iran, and we depend on that oil. Okay? The Ayatollah is going to overthrow the Shah. The Shah, knowing his government is about to his government is about to fall, flees the country. He takes his family, he leaves the country before he can be caught, and guess where he goes? Correct, those of you that said the United States. He heads to the United States, where we offer him asylum. After all, we put him into power, so we can now protect him. The story is he's come to the United States for medical treatment. The only medical treatment he came here for was to save his life from the Ayatollah. Once the Ayatollah is in power, the people demand the return of the Shah. They demand the United States return him. We refuse. So on November 4th, 1979, November 4th, 1979, followers of the Ayatollah Khomeini will storm the American embassy in Tehran, the capital of Iran, and they will take 52 Americans hostage. Actually, they take 66, but they let 14 of them go for health reasons and all that. So we'll say 52. 52 is the number we're going to use. They take 52 Americans hostage, and that's the picture here. These are U.S. embassy workers and some embassy military personnel. Not a lot. Not a lot there. We hadn't had a problem before. 52 Americans are taken and held hostage. Okay. President Carter tries to negotiate their release. Okay. Remember, he's a human rights sort of guy. Doesn't want to use the military, doesn't want to resort to war. So he tries to negotiate their release. When that fails, he tries economic sanctions. He clamps down on some Iranian assets in the U.S. and cuts off their money. That doesn't work. He gets talked into a military rescue mission. Okay? It is known as Operation Eagle Claw. Great name there. It's going to fail miserably. Carter will send in special forces to get the hostages. Unfortunately, the helicopters fly through, they're flying at night, and fly into a desert sandstorm. They turn around to head back. On their way back, two of the helicopters collide. 8 military are dead. So now not only does Carter still have 52 Americans being held hostage, he's now got 8 military dead on his hands. And Iran is crowing, look how great we are. Okay? This drags on and on and on and on. Okay? And when I mean on and on, I mean on and on. Okay? 444 days. the hostages are held. 444 days. Okay? Now, they're taken in November 79, so this is well over a year. That gets us to the following November, 1980. And that is crucial because Carter is going to have to run for re-election in November 1980, with 52 Americans still being held hostage. He doesn't have much of a chance. He is going to be opposed in November 1980. Carter's a Democrat. He will be opposed by Republican California Governor Ronald Reagan. Okay. And during the campaign, Reagan makes it very clear, I don't understand why the president doesn't just send in the American military to get our men and women back. If I were president, I would. Blah, blah, blah. Well, Reagan will win the election in 1980. Now, you win an election in November, but you don't get sworn in until January 20th to be exact. So if you do the math, 444 days from the time the hostages are taken turns out to be January 20th, 1981, Reagan's inauguration day. After he had been elected, during that time in between election and swearing in, Reagan makes it very clear, while President Carter may have been reluctant to use the military, I won't. If those men and women aren't free by the time I become president, I'm sending in the entire U.S. military to get them. So just shortly after Reagan is sworn in on January 20th, 1981, the hostages are released. Just less than an hour after Reagan is sworn in, the hostages are released. So while the Iranians were willing to jerk Carter around, they weren't willing to screw around with Reagan. Because I think they believed he would have. I don't know if he would have or not, but they believed he would. And that's the important thing. So Reagan manages to get done in less than an hour what Carter couldn't in 444 days. Carter's a good man, great man. One of the best ex-presidents we've ever had. Does lots of charity work, especially with Habitat for Humanity. He's negotiated ends to American crises since he was president. Great ex-president, not a good president. So, that's the Iran hostage crisis. Now, let's finish up by talking briefly about what's going on in Afghanistan. Afghanistan borders the Soviet Union. Well, not now, but it did back then. And the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, a border of Iran. They wanted to put a communist government in Afghanistan. Carter is president at the time. Carter strongly objects to Soviet presence in Afghanistan and will impose an embargo on the export of grain to the Soviet Union. So he's going to end the grain sales that Nixon had negotiated and had been going on. So he's going to stop selling grain to them, and he will boycott the 1980 Olympic Games, which will be held in Moscow. So we're not going. We're not playing in your games. Several other Western countries joined the boycott. The Soviet Union will return the favor 4 years later in 1984 when the Olympic Games are held in Los Angeles. The Soviet Union and its other communist countries won't come to our Olympics. So, a little petty here. We won't play in your games. Yeah, well, we won't play in yours either. A little petty back and forth there. But boycotting the Olympics and cutting off the grain sales are Carter's two early reactions here. Now, another thing we're going to do is help the Afghan freedom fighters fight against the Soviets. They are known as the Mujahideen. The Mujas, yes. The Mujahideen, these are Afghan freedom fighters, rebel fighters, who are fighting the Soviets for all they're worth. And it will work. The United States will send them aid. We will send them medicine, supplies, whatever they need. We will send them weapons. We will train the freedom fighters. Here you see pictures of the Mujahideen there. And Afghanistan is sometimes known as the Soviets' Vietnam. the Soviet Union will lose the fight in Afghanistan. These rebel men with, weapons here, with rifles, fight off the mighty Soviet Union and will drive them out of Afghanistan, just as the U.S. was driven out of Vietnam, thanks to the efforts of the Mujahideen. Now, one parting note here. The leaders of the Mujahideen that the U.S. were supporting, a name you might recognize, Osama bin Laden. Yes, Osama bin Laden, one of the leaders of the Mujahideen. They were very grateful for American help during the war, but as soon as the war was over, the United States left. We said, okay, we're done, we're going home now. And we left their country in a shambles. Their cities had been destroyed. Villages had been blown off the map by the Soviet Union. Their country needed rebuilt. Their country needed fixed. And the United States walked out. We helped them drive out the Soviets and then left them alone to pick up the pieces afterwards. They were a little resentful that while we have an interest there, we're more than willing to help. Let's get rid of the Soviets, keep communism out. But after our interest is done, we want absolutely nothing to do with them. When the United States refuses to help put Afghanistan back together, religious groups like the ones led by Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, step in and take our place. They help the people. They help the people rebuild. So those people, led by the Taliban, will grow very resentful toward the United States and will get even.